Jory is NDSU grad. He grew up at Berthold. Jory joined Steve Metzger in a farm management program here a few years ago, and his passion outside of the office is raising purebred Angus cattle. And so these Angus University steers, 3 of them are his. So we're going to pick them out and see how they're doing here pretty quick, Jory. But Jory and Steve work long and hard on enterprise analysis, looking at what producers can actually make in their farm. Like Steve said a few years ago, he helped some people exit farming gracefully. And other than that, you know, there aren't very many exiting these days because things are looking pretty good. So Jory's going to talk about cow costs for feed. So thank you for coming.
I think just to start out with a brief introduction of the farm management program, Steve and I are 2 of 16 instructors throughout the state that do this work. So when you get the handouts, the colored trifold handout was a team effort by everybody across the state. And those numbers that you'll see there are statewide. The other handout that I have is based off of the local numbers, off of just the people that Steve and I work with. And as we go through and talk about some of these cow costs today, I think we'll talk about them based off the local numbers because that's kind of probably where more of the producers that are here are within a certain radius of here. In the program here in Carrington, we kind of cover quite a bit of square miles. We go all the way west over into the McCluskey area, all the way east over up into Tulna. We go from about the Warwick area north all the way down south to north of Jamestown in that area. So we cover a lot of square miles. And one of the things that you'll see, or that you would notice if you looked at our books, is there's less cow herds out there over the last few years than there were 20 years ago. So the financial aspect of raising a cow and what they cost certainly has had an impact on how many people are still willing to do it. But one of the things that we'll look at then that Vern had asked me specifically to talk about was costs of feeding a cow. And when we do our numbers, you'll see that there's direct costs and overhead costs, but they can all be broken down further, and they kind of are on this graph. It breaks it down into actual feed costs. You'll notice that in 2000 it cost $198 to feed a cow, and last year in 2012 it cost $328. So $130 increase over the last 12 years was certainly a big rise in the price there. And the question then is, well, how is that relative to what it had been before? The total cost of raising that cow in 2000 was $355. In 2012, the total cost of having the cow was $566. So when I figured it out on a percentage basis, when Steve and I were talking about it, in 2000 it was 56% of the cost was feed cost, and in 2012 it was 58% of the cost. So percentage-wise, it still is costing you about the same percent to feed the cow of her total cost. So maybe feed-wise, we're not spending any more on a percentage basis, but we're certainly spending more. But we're spending more overall as well, too. In 2012, for the first time in the history of our numbers, if you add in the inventory change on your cow, the cost to actually keep a cow was over $600. And that was the first time, like I said, in the history of the numbers. So it definitely is something that gets more and more expensive each year. The 2013 and 2014 numbers you'll see there then, the only numbers that we have finished are through 2012, obviously, as we're still in 2013. In order to make the talk worthwhile, I thought that I'd look and project out what some of the costs should be. So based on the corn price for 2013, I added some feed costs there of about 10% over 2012. And I also increased the pasture cost by 10% for 2013 as well. But it's something that Vern had talked about, you know, when he said $45 equivalent rent. I think that in our program last year, the average pasture rent was $17. The year before that, it was $11. So we're definitely hitting a spike in that. And there's some rents that will remain $10 for a long time, depending upon what type of deal they had with somebody in their family or something like that. But we're certainly starting to see those $40 rents come in on pasture land, and it just goes in line with everything else. Cropland rent is probably increase by the same percentage as well, if not more. So it's something that certainly as we go through time here, talking about dry lotting and using that stuff instead of paying $40 or $50 pasture rent, you know, and the same goes along with other feed costs. It's been expensive, and hay has been expensive, so they've been on the rise. But if you look at 2014 then, using the corn futures market and reducing some of that feed cost, because we should be able to pay less for corn starting this fall, hopefully, if there's a good crop that comes in. All the rest of the feedstuffs will probably follow. The only thing that I didn't follow with when you're doing the projection was the pasture rent. I increased that by another 10% again, because that land, the race for land and values is something that I think is probably going to continue around this area for a little while. It just seems like the average call that Steve and I get probably from about February on is what are cropland rents, what are pasture rents, and it doesn't matter if it's from somebody that's farming or somebody that's renting out the land. They all want to know what it is and what they could be getting. So those are some things that I would anticipate will keep on increasing. I guess when you start talking about the cost of the cow then and the cost of feed, some interesting things that I came up with when looking at is, since the year 2000, we've increased the feed cost by $128, and our calves that we've sold, according to our numbers, are 20 pounds heavier than they were in 2000. If you look back through the numbers historically, the pounds weaned per exposed female in our program has increased by about 10 pounds over the last 20 years. We're increasing costs by a lot, and as cattle producers, we're lucky that the cattle price is better than it was, because if it wasn't, we'd probably be in a lot bigger hurt bag than we are sometimes already. So the question to me then, when I look at it, and something that I wonder all the time, is how do you increase those pounds if you're going to increase the amount of money spent? And that's a good thing, I think, when we talk about these Angus University steers. I realize that they're not cow-calf profit to the cow-calf operation. They're on a separate feeder operation. But if you know and you participate in some of those type of studies and you can find out how your cattle do, it helps you to know where you could add value to your program. Definitely something that producers need to keep in mind as they go through time here, is to find out where you can make some more money on your cattle and add some value somehow. When I talk about the price, in 2000 there, when it cost $200 to feed your cow, you sold a calf that weighed 592 pounds and the price was $91.47 per pound. And then in 2012, we averaged 612 pounds at selling time and $1.55.49 per pound. So we increased the price by 60-some cents, which certainly was the savior over the time. So as we go on and we look at cattle prices and we equate them with the feed prices, hopefully there's something that stays with trend, is that the cattle prices don't dip down to that same area, obviously, because that will cause a few more problems, I think. Some of the final stuff that I wanted to talk about was, you know, we talk about this feed cost and we talk about the total cow cost. How does it play on your profit in the end? We had 15 cattle herds that did enterprise analysis. The high cost feed cattle operation ended up to be the low profit operation. But the low cost feed operation was not the high profit operation. So in some ways, if you can minimize your feed cost or minimize your total cow cost, you're certainly going to make some more money. But just by having the low input doesn't mean you're going to have the high profit. I do a considerable amount of reading on a lot of the cattle subjects. One of the weekly emails I get is from a guy that preaches low input situations, and sure, low input is great because your costs are less, but unless you're getting enough to make up for it in the production area, you still don't necessarily make more money. So it's something to think about and something to look at as you go through. One of the studies I thought that these guys talked about earlier was with the cellulose product that you fed, where you know if you feed this much and it costs this much, you're going to make this much money extra. So some of that stuff is really important as we go through as far as cow costs to know if you're going to spend the money, what's it going to make you in return. In closing, I guess, with what I'm going to talk about, as we talk about the cow costs and especially the feed costs, what are the suggestions that we could use to improve some of that stuff in the future? It's really dependent upon each operation. I had talked to Vern yesterday about if you had a smaller cow and you could decrease your feed costs, what's the chances that the calf is going to still make the same amount of money? Because you're more than likely going to have a small calf. Well, the argument could be that you could run more cows if you had smaller cows, but in the end, it really comes down to what you can produce for the amount of money that you spend. So, however you can come up with a way to either decrease your costs and produce the same amount or increase what you produce as value, those are the main ways that you can go about looking at that, I guess. So with that, I guess, are there any questions on any of the specific costs or any of that sort of thing?
Thank you, Jory. One of the things we talked about yesterday is increasing the feed efficiency of the cows. And in the past, we've talked about selecting cows for more feed efficiency. And how do we do that selection? Do we do that with DNA markers? Do we do that with biological testing? There's a lot of effort all across the United States and around the world in making those cows more efficient. And the projections are we should be able to increase that feed efficiency by 20 or 30%, maybe higher, so we have more cattle that we could produce with the same amount of feed. That would be a huge improvement, but we're not there yet.